"I'm going to trust you." Those were the words an innocent and pure girl whispered to the millionaire who had filled her life with lies. Can true love be born after so much betrayal? He made her discover feelings she had never experienced before. Where are you watching from? Subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because this story will break your heart. The crash of metal against metal shattered the tranquility of that sunny morning in Oakidge, a small town nestled in the green mountains of Vermont. The sound echoed between the hills like a premonition, as if nature itself wanted to announce that something extraordinary was about to happen. Sometimes destiny finds us in the most unexpected moments, when our paths seem already traced and our vision of the world completely defined. Willow Mercer, with her 23 years recently completed and a life as simple as the wildflowers that grew in the meadows of her town, didn't hesitate for a second. Her legs, agile from years of hiking the steep trails of the region, propelled her toward the accident, while her heart beat with the intensity of someone who knows that every second counts. The luxury car, a Bentley Continental that clashed with the rusticity of the rural landscape, lay overturned in the ditch like a wounded creature. From the hood emerged a column of grayish smoke that rose lazily toward the blue Vermont sky. Through the shattered windshield, Willow could distinguish the motionless silhouette of a man. Time seemed to stop as she, with determination shining in her amber eyes, desperately sought a way to reach the driver. Her delicate hands, accustomed to kneading the dough for traditional maple pastries in the family bakery, trembled slightly as she picked up a stone from the road. With a precise blow, she finished breaking the already cracked glass. "Please wake up," she whispered, as her fingers touched the unconscious face of the stranger. A salty drop fell on the man's cheek, mixing with a thread of blood that flowed from his temple. Willow hadn't even realized she was crying. Her tears were the reflection of an empathy as pure as it was rare in these times. At that moment, while her hands gently held the stranger's head, Willow couldn't imagine that she was rescuing the wealthiest man in Boston, nor that this moment of compassion would change the course of her life forever. She also didn't know that the face with marked features and 41 years of experiences belonged to someone who, despite having everything, lacked the only thing she possessed in abundance: genuine love. The room at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston was an aseptic space where white predominated as a symbol of a blank canvas, of a new beginning. The monitors emitted rhythmic beeps, constant, like the ticking of a clock marking the passage of time for Elliot Blackwood, motionless in that bed for 3 long days. When his eyelids finally opened, heavy as lead curtains, the late afternoon light filtering through the window momentarily blinded him. As he focused his vision, the first thing his eyes caught were not the medical equipment nor the impersonal walls, but a female figure who contrasted with that clinical environment. It was her, the young woman who had rescued him. She was sitting in an armchair by the window, wearing a simple floral dress that seemed to bring with it the essence of the countryside. Her chestnut hair, pulled back in an unpretentious bun from which escaped some rebellious strands, framed a face that radiated a kindness almost forgotten in the world to which he belonged. Between her hands, she held a bouquet of wildflowers, as humble and authentic as herself. "You've come back," she said, and her melodious voice seemed to dance in the sterile air of the room. Relief flooded every syllable, every vibration of her vocal cords. "I promised I would stay until you woke up." Elliot tried to sit up, but a stab of pain stopped him. His eyes, accustomed to scrutinizing contracts and financial statements, now studied that unknown woman with perplexity. Why was she there? What did she gain by staying beside a stranger for 3 days? "Who are you?" he asked in a hoarse voice, unaccustomed after days of silence. "Willow," she replied simply, as if her name were explanation enough. And perhaps it was. Willow. Willow like the tree that bends but doesn't break. Willow like the hope that was beginning to germinate in the chest of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to have faith in something or in someone. "Why did you stay?" he insisted, unable to understand such altruism. She approached the bed, and the aroma of lavender and damp earth that her skin exuded contrasted with the antiseptic smell of the hospital. Her eyes, the color of freshly harvested honey, looked at him with a disconcerting sincerity. "Because no one should wake up alone in a hospital," she answered, with a simplicity that disarmed Elliot. "Besides, I wanted to make sure you were all right." He, accustomed to being surrounded by people interested only in his fortune and power, was perplexed by the crystalline transparency of that gaze. There was no calculation in those eyes, no ambition or ulterior motives. They only shone with the genuine naivety of youth and a kindness that he had considered extinct. "Thank you," he murmured, and that simple word, so little used in his usual vocabulary, tasted strange on his lips. A nurse entered the room, interrupting that moment. Seeing Elliot awake, she smiled professionally and hurried to check his vital signs. "Mr. Blackwood, we're glad to see you conscious." "I'll notify the doctor immediately," she said, and then, addressing Willow with familiarity, added, "Your faith has borne fruit, little one. You haven't left his side for a moment." When the nurse left, Elliot looked at Willow with renewed interest. In his world, people always wanted something in return for their attentions, yet there she was, a complete stranger who had watched over him without expecting anything in return. "How you know my name?" he asked, trying to decipher how much she knew about him. Willow nodded slightly. "The nurses told me. Also that you're from Boston and that—" She hesitated for a moment. "You have important companies, but that doesn't matter, does it? What matters is that you're okay." The simplicity of her response left him speechless. For her, his business empire, his bank account, his power, none of that was relevant compared to the simple fact of his human well-being. It was a perspective so foreign to his reality that he didn't know how to process it. In that instant, as the late afternoon light bathed the room with golden and copper tones, something changed inside Elliot Blackwood. A crack opened in the armor he had built during 4 decades of disappointments and betrayals. A small crack, almost imperceptible, but enough for a ray of light, or perhaps of hope, to begin filtering into his interior. The small town of Oakidge, nestled among mountains that seemed like stone guardians of a simpler time, was a complete universe for Willow. Every corner, every stone, every tree had a meaning, a story, a memory. Mornings invariably began with the ringing of bells from St. Peter's Church, an ancestral sound that had lulled generations of townspeople. Then came the aroma of freshly baked bread from old Mr. Fletcher's bakery, an elderly man with calloused hands and a permanent smile, who had known Willow since she took her first steps. "Good morning, little flower," he greeted her every morning when she entered to buy bread for the family breakfast. "How is your mother today?" Simple, predictable, comforting conversations, like the background sound of the machines from the maple syrup factory that supported half the town's families, including that of her best friend Hazel. The family bakery, a small place with just 3 tables in the main square, was the pride of the Mercer family. Mrs. Abigail Mercer, Willow's mother, was known throughout the region for her maple pastries and berry pies, recipes passed down from generation to generation, like a treasure more valuable than gold. "The secret is in the love, daughter," she always said to Willow as she kneaded with precise rhythmic movements. "You can follow the recipe to the letter, but if you don't put in love, it will never taste the same." In this universe of certainties and traditions, where each day resembled the previous one like drops of Vermont rain, the appearance of Elliot Blackwood was like a comet crossing a starry sky, leaving behind an impossible-to-ignore trail. After his recovery at the hospital, Elliot had insisted on visiting Oakidge to personally thank Willow's family. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon, when the square was bustling with activity after the main church service. His car, less ostentatious than the wrecked Bentley, but still clearly out of place among the old local utilitarian vehicles, attracted all eyes. Dressed in casual but evidently expensive clothes, Elliot walked toward the bakery with the confidence of someone accustomed to the world adapting to his steps, and not the other way around. Willow saw him from behind the counter, and something stirred inside her, a mixture of surprise and something else that she couldn't identify. "Mrs. Mercer," he greeted Abigail with exquisite manners, "I've come to personally thank you for raising such a brave daughter. Willow saved my life." Abigail, with floured hands and an apron stained with cinnamon, looked alternately at her daughter and the newcomer. Her eyes, so similar to Willow's but with the added wisdom of years, seemed to evaluate Elliot like someone examining fruit to determine if it's ripe. "My daughter only did what any decent person would have done, Mr. Blackwood," she replied with a mixture of pride and caution. "Please sit down. I'll serve you some coffee and freshly baked maple pastries." While Elliot tasted the traditional treats, his eyes never stopped observing Willow, who attended to other customers with a natural smile and simple grace. The way she moved, the way her laughter resonated like silver bells, the gentleness with which she treated the town's elderly, everything about her was so authentic that it was almost painful to contemplate. When was the last time I met someone who didn't wear a mask? Elliot wondered, feeling a pang of something akin to envy. Not for what she had, which was practically nothing in material terms, but for what she was, free, authentic, full in her simplicity. Hundreds of miles away in Boston, Elliot's world was as different as day and night. His penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor occupied the entire top floor of an emblematic building. Decorated by one of the most sought-after interior designers in America, the space was a perfect combination of minimalist elegance and cutting-edge technology. His mornings didn't start with church bells, but with the discreet buzz of his latest generation smartphone. Breakfast wasn't prepared by family hands, but by a personal chef who prepared gourmet creations adapted to his nutritional preferences. Meetings in rooms with panoramic views of Boston Harbor, where each decision could mean millions of dollars gained or lost, had been his daily bread for the last 20 years. Elliot Blackwood, heir to a business empire founded by his grandfather and expanded by his father, had learned from a young age that in his world trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "People always want something, Elliot," his father had told him on his deathbed, with the bitterness of someone who has seen his worst suspicions about human nature confirmed. "Always remember that, even those who claim to love you." And how he had remembered 2 failed marriages with women who indeed seemed more interested in his bank account than in his person had turned him into a cynical and distrustful man. At 41 he had built a financial empire, but lived in a solitude as luxurious as it was empty. Now, sitting in that small-town bakery, observing Willow with her simple dress and sincere smile, something stirred inside him. An uncomfortable question began to form in his mind. What was the use of everything he had achieved if he had no one to share it with? And even more disturbing, was it possible that this young woman with just 23 years and a life that fit in a small suitcase possessed something that he, with all his resources, had never been able to buy? The thank-you visits were transformed almost imperceptibly into encounters that both awaited, with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Elliot found increasingly elaborate pretexts to travel to Oakidge, and Willow found herself counting the days between one visit and the next. It was during one of these encounters, while they walked through the fields surrounding the town, that Elliot saw the true essence of Willow for the first time. She had stooped to help a butterfly trapped in a spider's web, freeing it with infinite care. "Thad could have damaged its wings trying to escape alone," she explained upon noticing Elliot's questioning look. "Sometimes we all need a little help, even the smallest creatures." The analogy didn't go unnoticed by Elliot. He too had been trapped, albeit in a different net, woven with threads of expectations, obligations, and appearances. "Why do you do this, Willow?" he asked suddenly, stopping in the middle of the path. "Do what?" she responded, genuinely confused. "Spend time with me. I'm almost 20 years older than you, come from a completely different world, and clearly don't fit into your life." The question hung between them like the mist that sometimes descended from the mountains and enveloped the valley. Willow looked at him with that transparency that disarmed him, that made him feel naked before her, despite being fully clothed. "I like how you look at me," she finally responded, with honesty that left him breathless. "Not as if you wanted something from me, but as if you really saw me. And I like how you talk about things I had never considered, how you make me think. It's like you're opening a window to a bigger world." The sincerity of her response moved him deeply. In his experience, people always had hidden motives, secret agendas. But Willow was like an open book, without second readings, without possible interpretations beyond what her words literally said. However, not everyone in Oakidge looked favorably upon this growing closeness. Murmurs began to spread like ripples in a calm pond. Curious glances became suspicious, and cordial smiles turned into tense gestures when Elliot appeared in town. "Be careful, Willow," Hazel warned one afternoon while helping at the bakery. "Men like him don't take interest in girls like us unless it's for passing amusement." "Elliot isn't like that," Willow defended, although a seed of doubt had been planted in her heart. That night, while helping her mother close the bakery, Abigail addressed the topic she had been avoiding for weeks. "Daughter," she began with that tone that Willow knew well, the one she used when she was going to say something important. "What intentions do you think that man has with you?" Willow stopped sweeping and looked at her mother. In her eyes there was no reproach, only genuine concern. "I don't know, Mum. We're getting to know each other." Abigail sighed deeply, as if gathering strength for what she was going to say. "Willow, that man is 18 years older than you. He has already lived a complete life before even meeting you. He has been married, has companies, belongs to a world we can't even imagine. Do you really believe he can offer you something real?" The words hit Willow like stones. Not because she hadn't thought about it before, but because hearing it from her mother's lips made it more tangible, more real. "Age is just a number, Mom," she replied, although her voice sounded less sure than she would have liked. "Age is experience, daughter. Its power, its imbalance." Abigail took her daughter's hands in hers. "I don't want you to get hurt. Men with money and power sometimes play with the feelings of young women like you." That night, Willow couldn't sleep. The words of her mother and Hazel mixed in her head, creating doubts where before there were only certainties. What if they were right? What if Elliot only saw her as a distraction, an exotic adventure, so different from the sophisticated women he was accustomed to? Meanwhile, in Boston, Elliot faced his own questioning. Nathaniel Warren, his lawyer, and one of the few whom he could consider a friend, watched him with concern as they shared a whiskey in the office. "A small-town girl, Elliot? Seriously?" he asked skeptically. "What would your board of directors say if they found out you were fraternizing with the daughter of a baker in a town forgotten by God?" "I'm not fraternizing," Elliot replied with irritation. "It's just a friendship. She saved my life. I'm grateful." Nathaniel looked at him with that expression he reserved for when he thought his client and friend was making a mistake. "I've known you for 15 years, Elliot. I've never seen you like this over just a friendship. Besides, there's something you should know." Elliot raised his eyes from his glass, suddenly alert. "The maple syrup factory in Oakidge," Nathaniel continued. "It's one of those that the board wants to close in the next restructuring. It's been operating at a loss for years." The news fell like a bucket of cold water on Elliot. The factory was the economic heart of the town, the livelihood of dozens of families, including that of Hazel, Willow's best friend. "It can't be," he murmured. "I won't authorize it." Nathaniel sighed, shaking his head. "It's not that simple. The reports are clear. That factory is a burden for the group. If you oppose the closure just because you have a personal interest in the town, the board will start asking questions. And you know as well as I do that there are shareholders who have been looking for an excuse to question you for some time." His friend's words resonated in Elliot's mind long after he had left. For the first time in years, he found himself at a crossroads, where his business interests clashed head-on with his personal feelings. And the most disturbing thing was that these feelings had developed for someone who, on paper, could not be more unsuitable for him. That night, both separated by hundreds of miles but united by a bond that neither fully understood, contemplated the same starry sky from their windows. The first cracks had appeared in what, until then, had been an almost magical connection, cracks that threatened to widen into insurmountable abysses. Dawn came to Oakidge with a fine, persistent drizzle, the kind that seems to want to wash away worries but ends up soaking the soul. Willow was heading to Mr. Fletcher's bakery as every morning, sheltered under a worn umbrella that had belonged to her grandmother. The bell on the door announced her entry with a cheerful tinkle that contrasted with her state of mind. The sleepless night, turning over her mother's and friends' warnings, had left furrows of tiredness under her eyes. "Willow," Mr. Fletcher's familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You arrived just in time. The whole wheat bread has just come out of the oven." While the old baker wrapped the loaves in paper, the door opened again. Willow didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. Something in the atmosphere changed, as if the air itself recognized a powerful presence. "Good morning." Elliot's deep and educated voice resonated in the small locale. Mr. Fletcher, who had heard the rumors like everyone in town, looked alternately at Willow and the newcomer, with poorly disguised curiosity. "Good morning, sir." He hesitated for a moment. "Blackwood. Elliot Blackwood," he introduced himself, shaking the baker's calloused hand with respectful firmness. "I've heard wonders about your whole wheat bread." The old man smiled, flattered despite his reservations. 60 years baking the same bread, Mr. Blackwood. The secret is in patience. Willow observed the scene with a mixture of surprise and fascination. Elliot, dressed in casual but evidently expensive clothes, was trying to fit into a world that wasn't his. There was something moving about that effort, in his willingness to adapt. They left the bakery together, sharing Willow's umbrella at her insistence. The forced proximity created an intimacy that made her heart race. "You don't need to pretend to be someone you're not," she said suddenly as they walked down the main street. Elliot looked at her, surprised by the observation. "What do you mean?" "This." Willow made a vague gesture that encompassed his clothes, his attitude, his very presence in that town. "Coming to the bakery, trying to talk like us, pretending you enjoy these simple things. You don't have to do that. I like who you really are." Her words momentarily left him speechless. Who was he really? It had been so long since he had played the role of the ruthless businessman, the cold and calculating man, that sometimes he forgot where the mask ended and his true self began. "I'm not pretending," he finally answered, and was surprised to discover it was true. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not playing any role." They stopped in front of the bakery, still closed at that early hour. The rain had ceased, leaving behind an aroma of damp earth and a special clarity in the air. "Willow," Elliot began, his voice deeper than usual, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see directly through his defenses, to the very core of his being. Willow nodded, inviting him to continue. "The maple syrup factory," he said, carefully choosing his words. "My company is the majority owner, and there are plans to close it." Willow's face visibly paled. The factory was the livelihood of almost half the town, including Hazel's family. "Close it? Why?" Her voice trembled slightly. "It's not profitable according to the financial reports. It's been operating at a loss for years," he explained, hating himself for sounding so cold, so corporate. "The board wants to redirect those resources to more modern facilities elsewhere." The information hit Willow like a betrayal, not only for what it meant for her town, but because he had known all this time and hadn't told her. "Since when have you known?" she asked with a calm that hid an inner storm. "I found out a few days ago," Elliot responded, deliberately omitting that he had been aware of the factory's problems for months, although not of the imminent decision to close it. "And all those times we talked, that I told you about my town, about the families that depend on the factory. You were evaluating the impact your closure would have." The implicit accusation made him step back as if she had slapped him. "No, Willow, it's not like that. But she was no longer listening. A terrible idea was beginning to form in her mind, a suspicion that made her stomach turn. "The accident," she said, almost in a whisper. "It wasn't a coincidence that you were on that road, was it? You were coming to inspect the factory." Elliot remained silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any explanation. "All this time," she continued, the words coming out like poisoned darts, "you've been playing with me? Using my naivety to what? Study the terrain? See how much the closure would affect the town?" "No, Willow, listen to me," he tried to explain, reaching for her hand. But she withdrew it, as if his touch burned. "Tell me the truth, Elliot. For once, be completely honest with me." The moment of truth had arrived, inevitable as the rising tide. Elliot took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say could destroy the only genuine thing he had had in years. "Yes, I came to inspect the factory that day. But the accident was real, and what happened between us is too. I never intended, never imagined that I would meet someone like you." The tears that Willow had been holding back began to slide down her cheeks, silent but unstoppable, like the rain that had fallen all night. "You know what's worse?" she said with a broken voice. "That I was starting to fall in love with you, despite all the warnings, despite knowing that we are from different worlds. And now I wonder if everything was part of some plan, if my feelings were just data in your evaluation." The confession, mixed with the accusation, pierced Elliot like a spear. He wanted to tell her that he too was falling in love, that for the first time in decades he felt alive, that she had awakened something in him that he believed was dead forever. But the words got stuck in his throat. "I think you should go," Willow finally said, drying her tears with the back of her hand. "And please don't come back. Not until you've decided who you really are and what you want." With those words, she opened the door to the bakery and entered, leaving Elliot alone under the sky that was beginning to clear, but with a storm raging inside him more violent than any Vermont tempest. The main office of Blackwood Group, located on the top floor of a skyscraper with privileged views of Boston Harbor, was a space where power was breathed like an expensive perfume. Italian designer furniture, contemporary artwork valued in the millions, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a 180-degree panoramic view of Boston's skyline. Elliot remained standing in front of one of these windows, observing the horizon with the lost gaze of someone who is actually contemplating interior landscapes. 3 weeks had passed since his confrontation with Willow, 3 weeks in which he hadn't been able to think of anything else but the hurt expression in her eyes. A discreet knock on the door pulled him from his reflections. "Come in," he said without turning around. Nathaniel Warren entered with a portfolio under his arm and a concerned expression. "The board is waiting, Elliot. They want to start the meeting." "Is everyone there?" "Everyone, including Whitman," he added, referring to the minority shareholder who had been trying to displace Elliot from the presidency for years. Elliot nodded and headed to the boardroom, where 8 men and 2 women, all dressed in dark tones with serious expressions, awaited his arrival. The murmur of conversations ceased as soon as he entered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he greeted with a nod before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for your punctuality." Richard Whitman, a man in his 60s with a shiny bald head and small, astute eyes, was the first to speak. "Let's get straight to the point, Elliot. We're here to vote on the restructuring plan. The closure of non-profitable facilities is the first item." Elliot looked at each of those present before responding. Faces he had known for years, some since he was a child accompanying his father to these same meetings. People with whom he had shared dinners, celebrations, moments of triumph and crisis. And yet, at that moment, he felt them more distant than ever. "Before proceeding to the vote," he began, "I want to propose an alternative." A murmur of surprise ran through the table. No one expected this. "The Oakidge factory can be profitable," Elliot continued. "I've been reviewing the reports, and I believe the problem isn't the facility itself but how we've been managing it." Whitman let out a short, humorless laugh. "Please, Elliot, that factory is a dinosaur. The machinery is obsolete, the processes are inefficient, and the labor costs are disproportionate to the production volume." "Precisely," Elliot responded, not letting himself be intimidated. "And I propose modernizing it, not closing it. A significant initial investment, yes, but one that in the long term would result more beneficial than closure." As Elliot presented his plan, detailing costs, timelines, and projections, the expressions around him oscillated between skepticism and surprise. It wasn't the type of proposal they expected from him, known for his ruthless pragmatism when it came to making business decisions. "May I ask what is behind this sudden interest in a factory that, until recently, you considered expendable?" Whitman inquired, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The question was loaded with insinuations. Elliot knew that rumors about his visits to Oakidge had reached the board's ears. He also knew that any sign of weakness would be exploited by Whitman. "A better analysis of the situation," he responded calmly. "And understanding the real impact that our decisions have on entire communities. It's not just a matter of corporate social responsibility, but of long-term vision." The discussion extended for hours, with increasingly technical arguments from Elliot and increasingly personal accusations from Whitman. In the end, when they proceeded to the vote, Elliot knew he was risking much more than the future of a factory. The result was tight: 6 votes in favor of his proposal, 4 against. A victory, but by a margin too narrow for his comfort. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Willow was walking down the cobblestone streets of Oakidge with a letter in her hand. It was from the Berklee College of Music in Boston, responding to an application she had sent months ago, even before meeting Elliot. They had accepted her to study vocal performance, a passion she had always kept secret, fearful that her dreams were too big for a small-town girl. "Willow!" Hazel's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "What's that? You seem to be in another world." Willow held out the letter, unable to contain a smile despite the sadness she still carried. "They've accepted me, Hazel. I can go to Boston to study." Her friend read the letter with increasingly wide eyes, then let out a scream of joy that made several passers-by turn to look at them. "This is incredible," she exclaimed, hugging Willow. "I always knew your voice was special. When are you going? What does your mother say?" Willow's smile faltered a bit. I haven't told her yet, and I'm not sure if I can go. You know how things are at the bakery, especially now with all the rumors about the factory." Hazel held her by the shoulders, looking at her intensely. "Listen to me, Willow Mercer. If you don't take this opportunity, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Your mother will understand. But what if they close the factory? Your family, all the others, we can't live conditioned by what may or may not happen," Hazel responded, with a wisdom improper for her 23 years. "Besides, who knows? Maybe that man of yours will do something about it." "He's not my man," Willow protested, though a treacherous blush tinged her cheeks. "And I don't think I'll see him again." But as she pronounced those words, a part of her wished they weren't true. Despite the pain of betrayal, despite the distance that separated them in all possible ways, she couldn't deny that Elliot had left a deep mark on her heart. That night, in the small room she had occupied since childhood, Willow made the most difficult decision of her life. She wrote a letter of acceptance to Berkeley, and another to her mother, explaining her feelings, her fears, her hopes. Included was the hope, now almost extinct, that perhaps at some point in the future she would meet again with the man who had burst into her life like a storm, forever altering the tranquil course of her existence. In 2 rooms separated by miles and worlds, Elliot and Willow were making decisions that would change their lives forever, without knowing that destiny, the same that had brought them together on a lonely road, had not yet finished weaving their shared story. Boston's South Station bustled with activity on that late September morning. Hurried travelers, families saying goodbye, the occasional whistle of trains and announcements over the loudspeaker composed the soundtrack of a place where stories constantly began and ended. For Willow, who had never left Vermont, everything seemed overwhelming and fascinating in equal parts. With a worn suitcase containing little more than clothes, some sheet music and a handful of memories, she waited for the bus that would take her to her dormitory and a completely new life. "Promise you'll call as soon as you arrive," said Abigail, trying to maintain her composure although her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I promise, Mom," Willow replied, hugging her tightly. The farewell had been more difficult than she had anticipated. Her mother, against all predictions, had supported her decision to go to Berkeley, even offering to send part of the bakery's income to help with expenses. Her younger siblings, Nathan and Sophie, now looked at her with a mixture of childish admiration and sadness. "Bring something from Boston," Sophie asked with the innocence of her 8 years. "And don't forget us when you're famous," added Nathan, trying to sound joking, but with a tremor in his voice that revealed his emotion. Willow knelt to hug them both, inhaling the familiar scent of their hair, engraving in her memory the touch of their small bodies against hers. "I could never forget you," she whispered. "You are my home, wherever I am." One last hug to her mother, a kiss on the cheek for Mr. Fletcher, who had insisted on coming to say goodbye, and finally an especially long hug for Hazel, who cried without trying to hide it. "You're going to triumph," her friend said in her ear. "And when you do, don't forget that I was the one who pushed you to go." Willow laughed through tears, grateful to have someone who believed in her even more than she believed in herself. The announcement that her bus was ready for departure came over the speaker system. With one last look at her family and friends, Willow boarded, found her seat by the window, and settled in, feeling a mixture of terror and excitement in the face of the unknown. As the bus began to move, she couldn't help but look for a figure in the station crowd that she knew wouldn't be there. 5 weeks had passed since her last encounter with Elliot, and although there were moments when the pain of his absence was almost physical, she forced herself to remember the reasons for their separation, the distrust, the lies by omission, the irreconcilable worlds to which they belonged. The landscape began to slide by her eyes. First the streets of Boston, then the suburban cities, and finally the interstate highway leading away from Vermont. Her land, receding like a dream. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the tears flow freely now that no one could see her. "Sometimes to find yourself, you first need to get lost," she thought, remembering a phrase her grandmother used to say. And perhaps that was exactly what she needed, to lose herself a little, to move away from everything familiar, to discover who she really was and what she wanted from life. 400 miles away, in the boardroom of Blackwood Group's central offices, Elliot faced the most serious crisis of his professional career. Richard Whitman, backed by 3 other board members, had presented a motion of no confidence against him. "What you're proposing for Oakidge is financial madness," Whitman was saying now, with the confidence of someone who knows he has powerful allies. "Investing millions to modernize an obsolete factory in a lost town, when we could build a new one in an industrial park with better communications. It's evident that your decisions are being influenced by personal factors." The insinuation couldn't be clearer. Somehow, Whitman had obtained information about his relationship with Willow. Perhaps through some local employee, perhaps through private investigators. How didn't matter as much as the fact that he was now using this information to question his leadership capacity. "My decisions," Elliot responded with a calmness far from what he felt, "are based on an exhaustive analysis of the situation. If you had read the complete report I presented, you would see that the investment in Oakidge is profitable in the medium term, generates brand value, and reinforces our corporate image of commitment to local communities." The discussion went on for hours, with increasingly technical arguments from Elliot and increasingly personal accusations from Whitman. In the end, when they proceeded to vote on the motion, the result was 5 in favor of keeping Elliot in the presidency and 5 against. "Technical tie," announced Nathaniel Warren, who was acting as secretary. "According to the bylaws, the deciding vote corresponds to the current president. Then the motion is rejected," concluded Elliot, aware that his position had never been so fragile. After the meeting, he remained alone in the room contemplating the sunset that tinged Boston's sky with orange and purple. He had won this battle, but by too narrow a margin. He knew that Whitman wouldn't give up, that he would continue undermining his authority, seeking allies, waiting for any mistake to attack again. And the most disturbing thing was that, for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he wanted to continue fighting. The empire he had built, which had meant so much to him, now seemed empty without someone to share it with. Someone real, not the sophisticated but calculating women who had passed through his life, nor the friends who were really temporary allies, united by common interests. Someone like Willow, with her crystalline laughter and her clear gaze, with her capacity to marvel at the simplest things and her courage to face the most difficult ones. He took out his phone and looked for her number, an impulse he had repressed dozens of times in the last weeks. His finger hovered over the call button, trembling as it had never done when signing million-dollar contracts or making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But finally he put it away without calling. She deserved better than a man who had started their relationship with lies, however noble his intentions might now be. She deserved someone her own age, someone without the baggage of personal failures and disappointments that he dragged along, someone who could offer her a future without the shadows of his past. However, as he left the office that night, he made a decision. He wouldn't try to contact her directly, but he would do something that perhaps someday she would come to know. Something that would prove, if only to himself, that the time they had spent together had profoundly changed him. Oakidge would not only not lose its factory, but would become the center of a pilot project for sustainable rural development. He would use all his power, all his resources and contacts to transform the small town into a model to follow. And he would do it not to impress her, not with the hope of winning her back, but because it was the right thing to do, because she had taught him to see beyond the numbers, to understand the human impact of each business decision. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Willow's bus arrived at South Station in Boston. The young woman contemplated with amazement the immensity of the terminal, with its constant flow of people who seemed to know exactly where they were going. She knew now, too. With her suitcase in one hand and her acceptance letter to Berkeley in the other, she took her first steps in the city that would be her new home. A city where no one knew her, where she could reinvent herself, where her dreams had the opportunity to come true. And although she tried not to think about it, a part of her heart remained anchored in Vermont. Not just in Oakidge, with her family and friends, but in the memory of eyes that had looked at her like no one had before, with a mixture of admiration, desire, and what was most surprising, genuine respect. Destiny had separated their paths, but both Elliot and Willow, despite the physical and emotional distance that now divided them, carried with them a part of the other that had transformed them forever. October, Boston displayed its particular symphony of colors in the public garden, where golden and copper leaves danced with each gust of wind. Willow walked along the paved paths, wrapped in a coat she had bought at a thrift store, trying to find a moment of calm before her next class at Berkeley. 2 months had passed since her arrival in the metropolis, 2 months of constant discoveries and challenges. The vertiginous rhythm of the big city, so different from the relaxed cadence of Oakidge, sometimes left her exhausted. The classes at Berkeley were much more demanding than she had imagined. Her classmates, mostly from families with musical tradition and privileged education, seemed to speak a language that she was only beginning to understand. "Miss Mercer, your technique is acceptable but lacks expressiveness, authentic emotion." Her voice teacher, Professor Harriet Lancaster, a retired soprano with a reputation for being implacable, had told her that same morning. "You sing as if reciting a memorized lesson, not as someone who has lived what the words say." The criticisms, although constructive, had hit her already fragile confidence. Sitting now on a bench by the lake, watching couples rowing in small boats, she wondered if she had made a mistake in coming. Perhaps her dreams were too big. Perhaps she should have stayed in the family bakery, settled for a simpler but more secure life. The sound of her phone pulled her from her reflections. It was Hazel, faithful to her promise to call regularly to keep her connected with Oakidge. "Willow, you won't believe what's happening here." Her friend's voice vibrated with enthusiasm. "The factory isn't just not closing, they're expanding it. They're hiring more staff, modernizing everything. My dad says he's never seen anything like it." Willow listened, stunned, as Hazel related the changes occurring in the town. Not only was the factory being renovated, but they were also implementing training programs for workers, had started works to improve local infrastructure, and were even talking about a project to recover the region's artisanal traditions. "And the most incredible thing," Hazel continued, "is that they say it all comes directly from him, from Elliot Blackwood. That he has personally assumed the project, that he comes regularly to supervise the progress." Willow's heart skipped a beat. Elliot was still going to Oakidge? Had he fulfilled his tacit promise not to allow the factory to close? Did he think of her when he visited the town? "Has he asked about me?" The words escaped her lips before she could contain them. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Not exactly," Hazel responded cautiously. "He's very reserved, barely talks to anyone beyond strictly professional matters, but what? But once I saw him stop in front of the bakery, he just stood there, looking at the door for a moment, as if deciding whether to enter or not. In the end, he left, but there was something in his expression, I don't know how to explain it." Her friend's words awakened a whirlwind of contradictory emotions in Willow. Joy to know he was helping her town, that perhaps her words had had some effect. Sadness because, despite everything, he hadn't tried to contact her, and a kind of anticipated nostalgia for a future that never came to be. "And you?" Hazel asked, skillfully changing the subject. "How's Berkeley? Have you met any interesting Bostonians?" Willow tried to sound animated as she told her about her classes, her classmates, the small daily discoveries in a city that seemed infinite. She didn't mention her moments of doubt, the nights of silent crying hugging her pillow, the constant sensation of not completely fitting into this new world. After hanging up, she remained sitting on the bench, observing how the shadows lengthened with the arrival of evening. An elderly couple passed in front of her, walking slowly, their hands intertwined with the confidence that only decades of togetherness give. Willow followed them with her eyes, wondering if someday she would have that. Someone who would continue to support her when they both had white hair and faltering steps. That night, in the small room she rented in a shared apartment with 2 other students, Willow took out her composition notebook. She had been working on her own piece, something she had never shown to anyone, not even her professors. It was a melody that had begun to form in her mind the day she met Elliot, and had been evolving with each encounter, with each revelation, with each pain and each joy that he had brought to her life. As her fingers slid over the keys of the small digital piano she had bought with her first Boston savings, the music flowed as if it had a life of its own. It was no longer just a melody, but a complete story, her story, narrated through notes that rose and fell like waves of emotion. "Maybe Professor Lancaster is right," she thought as a solitary tear rolled down her cheek. "I can't sing about love, longing, or loss as if they were abstract concepts. I have to sing them from within, from lived experience." And she had much to sing about now, about a casual encounter that had altered the course of her existence, about how love could flourish in the most unexpected places between seemingly incompatible people, about betrayal, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption, about paths that separate, but that perhaps, just perhaps, were destined to cross again. Hundreds of miles away in his penthouse in Boston, Elliot contemplated the city illuminated by the nightlights. In his hand, he held a cup of coffee that had gone cold long ago, forgotten as his mind traveled to another place, another time. The past weeks had been a roller coaster of professional tensions. The Oakidge project, which he had assumed as a personal mission, encountered constant obstacles. Whitman and his allies questioned every investment, every decision, seeking any excuse to demonstrate that he was putting sentimentality before business rationality. And perhaps they were right. Perhaps there was something irrational in his determination to transform that small town. But for the first time in his adult life, he didn't care about being considered irrational. He had lived too long a prisoner of the cold logic of numbers, of others' expectations, of his own carefully constructed image of a ruthless man. Each time he visited Oakidge to supervise the project's progress, he felt a bittersweet mixture of emotions. Joy to see how the town was beginning to revitalize, how faces that before looked at him with suspicion now greeted him with growing respect. And a dull, persistent pain when he passed in front of the Mercer's bakery, knowing he wouldn't find inside the only person he really wanted to see. He had thought about asking about her, about contacting her somehow, but he always stopped at the last moment. What right did he have to burst back into her life? She was young, with a whole future ahead of her, a future that shouldn't be limited by a man twice her age, loaded with a complicated past and a turbulent present. No, it was best to let her go, to do what he was doing for Oakidge not as an attempt to win her back, but as a tribute to what she had taught him, as a way to demonstrate, even if only to himself, that her passage through his life had not been in vain. And yet, on nights like this, when the silence of his luxurious apartment became almost tangible, when not even work could distract him from his thoughts, he missed her with an intensity that surprised him. He missed her laughter, her naive but deep questions, the way she looked at him as if she really saw him, not the powerful businessman, but the vulnerable man who hid behind that facade. Perhaps it's better this way, he told himself, finally moving away from the window. Perhaps some encounters are destined to be brief but transformative, like a summer storm that changes the landscape forever. With that thought, he returned to his desk, where dozens of reports and proposals related to the Oakidge project awaited him. If he couldn't have Willow in his life, at least he could ensure that her legacy endured, that her hometown flourished, that families like hers had a more promising future. It was little consolation for the emptiness he felt, but it was something, and for now it would have to be enough. Snow fell softly over Boston, transforming the city into a landscape from a winter tale. It was the first snowfall of the year, and Willow, who had never seen the city covered in white, watched fascinated from the window of the cafe where she worked part-time to complement Berkeley's modest scholarship. 6 months had passed since her arrival in Boston, 6 months of personal and musical growth, of emotional ups and downs, of moments of doubt and small triumphs. Her voice had developed remarkably under Professor Lancaster's strict tutorship, who recently had congratulated her on her interpretation of a particularly difficult area. "Now, yes, Mercer," the professor had told her, with that mixture of severity and approval that constituted her maximum praise. "Finally, you're singing from the heart, not just from technique." And it was true. Willow had learned to channel her experiences, her repressed emotions, her nostalgia, and her hopes into her music. Every note she sang was impregnated with real experiences, with authentic feelings, with personal truths that resonated with those who listened to her. "Willow, table 5, please," the manager's voice pulled her from her reflections. Adjusting her apron, she headed to the indicated table, notepad in hand and professional smile on her lips. But the smile froze when she recognized the woman sitting there, Victoria Hamilton, Elliot's ex-wife. She had seen her in photographs while looking for information about him after her departure, trying to better understand the man who had burst into her life. Tall, elegant, with that type of cold beauty that seems to resist the passage of time without apparent effort. Her black hair, perfectly styled, framed a face of sharp features and astute eyes that now evaluated her with curiosity. "May I take your order?" Willow asked, maintaining her composure despite the whirlwind of thoughts stirring in her mind. "A latte and a slice of apple pie, please," Victoria responded without stopping her observation. "Excuse me, but do we know each other?" Willow shook her head, perhaps too quickly. "No, ma'am. It's the first time I've served you." Something in Victoria's expression changed, as if she had caught the lie in her voice. "It's curious," she said, slightly tilting her head. "You remind me of someone, a girl from a Vermont town. Elliot wouldn't stop talking about her for a while." The name fell between them like a stone in a pond, creating waves of almost palpable tension. Willow felt her cheeks flush, betraying her. "It's you, isn't it?" Victoria continued with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The girl who saved him from the accident, the one who had him so distracted." "I'll bring your order right away," Willow responded, turning to escape that penetrating gaze. But Victoria stopped her, gently holding her wrist. "Don't run away, dear. I'm not the enemy. In fact, I think we have a lot to talk about." 20 minutes later, when her break began, Willow found herself sitting across from Victoria Hamilton with a cup of tea she hadn't ordered and a knot in her stomach. "So, you're a voice student," Victoria commented, after Willow had reluctantly told her briefly about her life in Boston. "Interesting. Elliot always had a weakness for artists. His first wife was a pianist, did you know?" Willow shook her head. There were so many things she didn't know about him, so many layers of his life that she had never had the opportunity to explore. "Why do you want to talk to me?" she finally asked, tired of the cat and mouse game. Victoria took a sip of her coffee before answering. "Out of curiosity, I suppose. I wanted to meet the woman who achieved what no one had managed in decades, making Elliot Blackwood reconsider his priorities." Willow looked at her without understanding. "What do you mean?" "Oh, come on." Victoria sketched a sardonic smile. "That project in your town, Oakidge, isn't it? It's the talk of the entire Boston business circle. Elliot, the ruthless shark, the man who never let feelings interfere with business, risking his position on the board for a little town that doesn't even appear on many maps. Some think he's lost his mind. Others, the more romantic ones, believe he's finally found his heart." Each word was like a revelation for Willow. Was Elliot really risking so much for Oakidge? For her, indirectly? "I didn't know," she murmured. "We haven't spoken for months." "I'm not surprised," Victoria responded, with a tone that mixed compassion and a certain satisfaction. "Elliot was never good at expressing his feelings. He prefers actions to words, grand gestures to sincere conversations." She paused, as if evaluating whether she should continue before adding, "You know he has a son, right?" The question fell like lightning on Willow. No, she didn't know. He had never mentioned any son during their conversations. "Alexander," Victoria continued, noting her confusion. "He's 19, studying in London. He's from his first marriage. They rarely see each other. Their relationship is complicated. Another of the many things Elliot prefers not to discuss." Willow's head was spinning. How much more did she not know about the man she had fallen in love with? How many secrets, how many past lives, how many broken relationships made up the complete mosaic of Elliot Blackwood? "Why are you telling me all this?" she finally asked, with a barely audible voice. Victoria observed her for a long moment, as if deciding something important. "Because I think you should know before—" She stopped, reconsidering her words. "Let's say I'm giving you the information I would have liked to have had before getting involved with him." "We're not involved," Willow hastened to clarify. "We haven't seen each other for months. We probably never will again." Victoria's expression softened slightly, showing for the first time something like genuine empathy. "Dear, if he's willing to risk the empire he built over 2 decades for the town where you grew up, you're more involved than you think. The question is, what do you intend to do about it?" That night, alone in her room, Willow couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's revelations. She felt as if she had been seeing only fragments of a much larger, more complex, and possibly more painful picture. Elliot had a son, almost her age. He had had 2 failed marriages. He was risking his professional position for Oakidge, for a project that, according to Victoria, many considered a business madness. And, most disturbing, he hadn't tried to contact her even once in all these months. What did all this mean? Were his actions in Oakidge a way of asking forgiveness, an indirect way of showing her something? or simply the culmination of a personal change that she had initiated, but that no longer included her. The melody she had been composing, the one born the day she met Elliot, remained incomplete. It lacked an ending, a resolution, like her own story with him. On an impulse, she took her phone and looked for the number she had never deleted, though she had never used it either. Her fingers trembled over the screen, hesitating while her heart beat strongly against her ribs. What would I say to him? She thought. That I still think about him? That I appreciate what he's doing for my town? That I've tried to forget him, but his memory refuses to fade? Finally, with a sigh, she set the phone aside without calling. She wasn't ready yet. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many wounds not completely closed. And most importantly, she still hadn't discovered who she was outside of Oakidge, outside of her family, outside of the expectations and limitations that had always defined her existence. She approached the piano and began to play her unfinished composition. The notes flowed like musical tears, telling a story of encounter, loss, yearning, but without resolution, without a defined ending. Perhaps, she thought as her fingers caressed the keys, the ending is still to be written, and perhaps it doesn't depend only on me. Spring arrived in Boston with an explosion of color and vitality that seemed to mock Willow's state of mind. Almost a year had passed since her arrival in the metropolis, a year of growth, discoveries and challenges that had profoundly transformed her. Her vocal technique had been refined to the point that Professor Lancaster, always so sparing with praise, had recommended her to participate in Berkeley's prestigious annual competition, an event that attracted talent scouts from all over the country and could open crucial doors for her career. "You have the potential to win, Mercer," the professor had told her with her characteristic frankness. "Your voice has matured extraordinarily, and now you sing with an emotion that few manage to convey. But you need a piece that defines you, that shows not only your technique but your soul." That was precisely the problem. None of the classic arias she had been practicing seemed to completely capture what she felt, what she needed to express. And then she remembered her unfinished composition, the one that had grown with her since she met Elliot, evolving with each new feeling, with each revelation, with each moment of doubt and clarity. For weeks she worked on it obsessively, polishing each note, each transition, trying to capture in the music all the complexity of her emotions. The melody had transformed into something more elaborate, more profound, a piece that began with the innocence and wonder of the first encounter, traversed the confusion and pain of separation, and culminated in what? That was the problem. She didn't know how to end it. She didn't know how this story was supposed to conclude. "It needs an ending," her friend Julian, a fellow student at Berkeley, who had become her closest friend, told her. "Something that closes the circle, that gives meaning to everything that came before." "I know," Willow responded, frustratedly running her hands through her hair, now cut in a more urban style that reflected her personal evolution. "But I don't know what that ending is. I don't know if it should be hopeful or melancholic, if it should suggest a reunion or a definitive farewell." Julian observed her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to read beyond her words. "Maybe you can't finish it because your own story hasn't concluded yet," he suggested. "Maybe you need real closure before you can create a musical one." His words resonated in Willow with the force of a truth she had been avoiding. Despite the months past, despite her personal and professional growth, a part of her remained anchored in that inconclusive farewell with Elliot. She kept wondering what would have happened if circumstances had been different, if he had been sincere from the beginning, if she had been more understanding of his motives. That night, while reviewing her email, she found a message from Hazel that would change the course of events. "Dear Willow, I hope you're well and that Boston continues treating you as you deserve. Things have changed so much here that you would barely recognize Oakidge. The factory is operating at full capacity, with new equipment and better working conditions. They've opened a cultural center where they offer music, painting, and traditional crafts workshops. They're even restoring St. Peter's Church to its original splendor. But I'm not writing just to tell you this. There's something important you should know. Elliot Blackwood has resigned as president of Blackwood Group. The news has fallen like a bomb throughout the region. They say there was a decisive confrontation with the board, that they tried to block the last phase of the Oakidge project, and he refused to yield. Apparently, He presented his resignation on the spot. No one knows what he'll do now, but there are rumors that he's bought a house on the outskirts of town. The old Whitmore mansion, remember? The one that always seemed like a castle to us when we were children. I don't know if this means anything to you still, but I felt you should know. Whatever your decision, know that I'll always support you. With love, Hazel Fur. P.S. I almost forgot. The Spring Festival will be next week. It would be wonderful if you could come, even if just for a few days. We miss you. Willow read the message 3 times, trying to process the magnitude of what it meant. Elliot had resigned from his business empire. He had chosen Oakidge above everything he had built over decades. For the town? For her? For some kind of personal redemption? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do about it? The Berkeley competition was in 2 weeks. Missing the final rehearsals to go to the Oakidge Festival would be madness. Professor Lancaster would be furious, and her chances of winning would be considerably diminished. It was her future, her career, what was at stake. But on the other hand, she felt that if she didn't go, if she didn't face this inconclusive chapter of her life once and for all, she would never be able to move forward completely. She would never be able to finish her composition. She would never be able to sing with all the truth of her being. She spent the night awake, debating between reason and impulse, between security and risk, between the professional future she could build in Boston and the emotional past that awaited her in Oakidge. At dawn, with the first rays of sun filtering through her window, she made a decision. It wouldn't be easy and it would involve sacrifices, but for the first time in a long time, she felt completely sure of what she should do. I need special permission to be absent for 4 days, she told Professor Lancaster that same morning, facing her severe gaze with a determination that surprised the professor. It's an urgent personal matter. I promise I'll be back for the last days of rehearsal before the competition. Do you realize what you're risking, Mercer? The woman responded, evaluating her with those eyes that seemed to see through any excuse. This competition could be the turning point of your career. I know, Willow nodded, but this is the turning point of my life. And if I don't resolve it now, I fear it will affect my performance much more than a few days of absence. Perhaps it was the confidence in her voice, perhaps the transparent honesty in her eyes, but something in her attitude made Professor Lancaster, against all predictions, nod slowly. 3 days, not 1 more, she finally conceded. And I expect to see you back with that composition of yours finally finished, because that's what you're going to present in the competition, right? Your own piece. Willow nodded, surprised that the professor had guessed her intentions. It's a risk, Professor Lancaster continued. The judges usually prefer interpretations of established works, but if you manage to transmit in your music what I see now in your eyes, perhaps it's worth betting everything. 2 days later, Willow found herself on a bus heading to Vermont, observing how Boston's urban landscape gradually gave way to open fields, then to mountains, and finally to the green valleys that announced the proximity of her homeland. Her mind oscillated between anticipation and fear. What would she say when she saw Elliot? What if he no longer felt the same? What if all these months had transformed his feelings, as they had transformed so many other aspects of her life? What if the Elliot she found now was as different from the one she remembered as she herself was from the innocent young woman who had left Oakidge almost a year ago? Sometimes, and she thought as the bus entered Vermont territory, we must be willing to lose everything to discover what really matters. And sometimes the greatest risk is not risking at all. With that thought resonating in her mind, she prepared herself for the reunion that could change the course of her life forever. A reunion that, however it went, would finally give her the closure or the new beginning that her heart and her music so desperately needed. The air in Oakidge smelled exactly as she remembered, of damp earth, of freshly baked bread, of wild rosemary, and of that indefinable aroma of home that no big city could replicate. Willow breathed deeply as she descended from the taxi that had brought her from the bus station, feeling how each cell of her body recognized and celebrated the return. And yet, the town that welcomed her was not exactly the same one she had left behind. Even from the main entrance she could appreciate the changes. Restored facades, repaved streets, new businesses where before there were only permanently lowered shutters. Oakidge seemed to have awakened from a long lethargy, vibrating with a renewed energy that was both strange and stimulating. Willow! Hazel's familiar voice pulled her from her observations. Her friend ran toward her with the same overflowing enthusiasm as always, but with an air of maturity she didn't have when they said goodbye. They merged in a long embrace, full of that affection that neither time nor distance had managed to erode. "Look at you!" Hazel exclaimed, separating to examine her better. "You look like a real Bostonian. The short hair suits you perfectly, and that coat, so elegant." Willow laughed, moved by the reception. "And you seem happier than I've ever seen you," she responded, noting the special glow in her friend's eyes. "Does it have something to do with that ring on your left hand?" Hazel blushed visibly, looking at the simple but beautiful engagement ring that adorned her finger. "Noah and I are getting married in the fall," she confessed, with a mixture of shyness and pride. "He got a position as supervisor at the factory, with the new internal promotion system that—" She paused as if suddenly remembering something delicate. "Well, that they implemented with the restructuring." The unspoken name floated between them like a ghost. Elliot. His influence was palpable in every improvement, in every new opportunity, in the renewed hope that seemed to be breathed in the environment. "I'm very happy for you, truly," said Willow, hugging her friend again. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." As they walked toward the town center, Hazel updated her on all the changes. The factory now produced gourmet maple syrup that was exported throughout the country. The cultural center offered scholarships for local young talents. There was even a small theater where amateur groups performed plays on weekends. "And it all started with him," Hazel finally said, as if she could no longer contain the topic. "At first no one trusted him. They thought it was some kind of business strategy or a way to wash his image. But when he started coming regularly, when we saw how he was personally involved in every detail, how he really listened to what we needed, even the most skeptical ended up changing their minds." Willow listened with a mixture of amazement and a strange feeling of pride. This was the Elliot she had glimpsed beneath the facade of the ruthless businessman, the man capable of compassion and generosity who had hidden behind years of self-imposed cynicism. "And now?" she asked, trying to make her voice sound casual. "Is it true he's bought a house here?" Hazel nodded, slowing her pace as they approached the main square. "The Whitmore mansion. He's restoring it, respecting the original architecture. People say he spends most of his time there alone, working on the rehabilitation with his own hands or reading for hours in the garden. It's as if he's seeking, I don't know, peace, I suppose." "Do you think I should—" Willow began, but interrupted herself as they turned the corner and saw the square bubbling with activity. The spring festival was in full swing. Stalls of local crafts, traditional music, children running with colorful balloons, elderly people chatting on freshly painted benches, couples dancing to the sound of a fiddle. Life in its purest and most communal expression. And there, helping to hang garlands of flowers between two trees, was him, Elliot, dressed in simple but quality clothes, his hair slightly longer than she remembered, some grey at his temples, shining in the sun. Thinner, perhaps, but with a healthy appearance, as if the country air suited him. It was as if time had stopped, as if all the hustle and bustle of the square had vanished, and only the two of them remained, separated by physical meters, but by emotional kilometers, by months of silence, by decisions made and paths traveled in solitude. He hadn't seen her yet. He remained focused on his task, smiling occasionally at the comments of neighbors who collaborated in the preparations. There was something different about his smile, Willow thought. Something more authentic, less calculated, as if he had dropped a mask he had worn for so long that it had become part of his face. "Go," Hazel whispered, giving her a gentle push. He's waited long enough. With her heart beating like an uncontrolled drum, Willow advanced through the crowd. Some people recognized her and greeted her with surprise, but she barely registered their voices. Her eyes, her mind, her whole being was focused on the man who, still unaware of her presence, continued his work a few meters away. Finally, as if feeling the weight of her gaze, Elliot stopped. Slowly, like someone fearing that a sudden movement might make a precious vision disappear, he turned toward her. Their eyes met across the space that separated them, and the whole world seemed to hold its breath. "Willow," he pronounced, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer, like the end of a long wait. "Hi, Elliot," she responded, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. when her entire interior was trembling. He descended from the small ladder where he was standing and walked toward her, each step measured as if fearing she would vanish if he approached too quickly. He stopped a meter away, respecting a space that was no longer physical, but emotional. "You've come back," he said simply, and in those two words there was so much: surprise, relief, contained hope. "For the festival," she clarified, although they both knew it was much more than that. "And to—" she hesitated for a moment, "to finish something I left pending." A shadow of uncertainty crossed Elliot's face. "How long will you stay?" 3 days. I have to go back to Boston for an important competition." He nodded, processing the information. 3 days. Barely a blink of an eye after so many months of absence. And yet, it could be enough. It had to be. "There's so much I'd like to tell you," he began, but was interrupted by the mayor, who approached to consult him about the organization. "I'm sorry," Elliot apologized, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "I have some responsibilities here, but—" "It's okay," Willow reassured him with a small smile. "I'm not going anywhere. At least not today." He returned the smile, and for an instant it was as if the months of separation compressed until they almost disappeared. "Tonight," said Elliot. "At the mansion, at 8. Please." It wasn't an order, but a request, almost a plea. Willow nodded, feeling how her heart accelerated at the prospect of a more private, deeper encounter. "I'll be there," she promised. As she watched him walk away, attending to his responsibilities with the festival, a crystalline certainty formed in her mind. Tonight, for better or worse, she would find the ending to her composition, the ending she had been searching for so long. The Whitmore mansion rose majestically against the evening sky, its century-old stones bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Although it still showed evident signs of being in the process of restoration, with scaffolding on a section of the roof and construction materials stacked on one side, the building emanated a serene beauty, like that of an elder who carries his wrinkles with dignity. Willow paused a moment before the wrought-iron gate, newly restored but respecting its original design. A gravel path, freshly laid, led to the main entrance, flanked by rose bushes that were beginning to show their first spring buds. She breathed deeply, trying to calm the nerves that tightened her stomach, and advanced along the path. Each step resonated on the gravel with a crunch that seemed amplified by the surrounding silence, announcing her arrival long before she could knock on the door. It wasn't necessary. Before she reached the porch steps, the door opened and Elliot appeared on the threshold. He had changed from the casual clothes he wore at the festival to a more formal but not excessively elegant outfit. Dark pants and a blue shirt that highlighted the grey of his eyes. "Welcome," he said, with a smile that tried to hide his nervousness. "Thank you for coming." He led her inside, through a spacious vestibule where restored original elements coexisted with subtle contemporary touches. The old wooden floor shone with a new varnish. The walls displayed their original stone, cleaned and repointed, and large windows allowed natural light to flood the space. "It's beautiful," Willow commented, genuinely impressed. "You've respected the soul of the building." "That was the goal," he responded, pleased with her approval. "To preserve its essence, its history, but adapting it for a new life, like a second chance." The metaphor didn't go unnoticed by either of them. Elliot guided her to a rear terrace, a spacious and welcoming area with views of the valley. He had prepared a small table with a simple but evidently cared-for dinner, and a bottle of white wine cooled in an ice bucket. "I hope you're hungry," he said, pulling back a chair for her to sit. "I prepared it myself, one of the many skills I've had to learn in these months." Willow smiled, imagining this man, who once depended on personal chefs, learning to cook for himself. It was a revealing detail of how his life had changed. The dinner initially transpired in an atmosphere of slightly tense courtesy, with conversations about safe topics: the festival, the improvements in town, the extraordinarily mild weather for this time of year. But as the wine decreased in their glasses, and the sky was tinged with the intense colors of sunset, the artificiality gave way to a recovered intimacy. "Are you happy in Boston?" Elliot finally asked, formulating the question he seemed to have been containing all night. Willow considered her answer, determined to be completely honest. "I've grown there," she said slowly. "As a musician, as a woman, as a person, I've discovered parts of myself I didn't even know existed. In that sense, yes, there is a happiness in self-discovery. But, he encouraged her when she stopped. But there are moments, especially when I'm composing or singing something particularly emotional, when I feel incomplete, as if I've left something behind, something important. Their gazes met across the table, and for an instant, words became unnecessary. They both knew exactly what she was referring to. "I've missed you," Elliot confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "More than I thought possible." "I've missed you too," she responded, without looking away. "But then why did I never call you?" he completed her question. "Because I thought you deserved better. Someone without my baggage, without my mistakes, someone your age with whom you could build a future without shadows from the past." "That wasn't a decision for you to make alone," Willow replied, with a flash of the indignation she had felt during the first months of separation. "You should have asked me what I wanted." Elliot nodded, accepting the justice of her reproach. "You're right, I suppose that despite everything I thought I had learned, I was still acting from arrogance, deciding what was best for you without consulting you, as if my experience gave me that right. I'm sorry." The sincerity of his apology disarmed Willow. It wasn't the businessman Elliot who was speaking, but the vulnerable man she had glimpsed on rare occasions during their time together. "Why did you resign from your company?" she asked, slightly changing the subject. "Was it really because of the Oakidge project?" Elliot leaned back in his chair, carefully considering his answer. "It was the catalyst, yes. The board wanted to cancel the last phase, the most important, the educational and cultural program. They argued that it didn't provide direct economic value, that it was a superfluous expense, and I realized that I could no longer think like them. I no longer wanted to." He paused, searching for the exact words. "I realized I was perpetuating a system that measures success solely in terms of financial benefits, ignoring the human impact, the community value, the long-term sustainability, a system in which I myself had ceased to believe." "But it was your legacy," Willow pointed out. "What you had built over decades." "No," he denied with a sad smile. "It was my father's legacy and my grandfather's before him. I was just following a path they had traced without really questioning it. My true legacy, well, I hope I'm just beginning to build it." He stood up and held out his hand, inviting her to follow him. "There's something I want to show you." He led her through the house to a room in the east wing, a spacious chamber with large windows overlooking the garden, now illuminated by the silvery light of the rising moon. In the center of the room, imposing and beautiful, was a grand piano. "It's for you," said Elliot, with an emotion barely contained in his voice. "I bought it thinking of you, hoping that someday—" "Well, hoping." Willow approached the instrument, caressing the polished wood with reverence. It was a Steinway, a model she had only been able to admire at Berkeley, too expensive for someone like her to dream of owning. "I can't accept it," she said, though her fingers were already caressing the keys with longing. "I'm not asking you to accept it now," he responded, approaching but maintaining a certain distance, as if respecting her space to decide. "I just wanted you to know that it's here waiting for you like me." The confession, so simple and direct, made Willow feel a knot in her throat. "There's something I should tell you," she said, sitting on the piano bench. "Something important." She then told him about the competition, about how it could be the turning point in her career. She told him about her unfinished composition, about how it was born the day she met him, and had evolved with each significant moment of their relationship, about how she hadn't been able to find a suitable ending because her own story with him lacked resolution. "Would you play it for me?" Elliot asked when she finished, with a mixture of curiosity and fear, like someone who knows they are about to hear a naked truth about themselves. Willow nodded and placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, connecting with the emotion that had fed each note, and began to play. The music filled the room like a living being, vibrant and emotional. It began with simple, almost naive notes that evoked the wonder of the first encounter. Then it became more complex, more intense, reflecting the mutual discovery, the growing connection. Next came a turbulent passage, full of dissonances that represented the betrayal, the revelation of the lies, the rupture. And after that, a more reflective, melancholic section that spoke of growth in distance, of longing, of lessons learned in solitude. But then, where resolution should have arrived, The music stopped abruptly, as if suspended in the air, waiting for a conclusion that had not yet been written. The silence that followed was loaded with meaning, with possibilities, with unanswered questions. "It's beautiful," Elliot finally said, with a voice hoarse with emotion. "And I understand why you couldn't finish it, because it depends on what we decide now, both of us." He sat next to her on the bench, close enough to feel her warmth, but without touching her yet. "Willow," he began, pronouncing her name as if it were the most important word in the world. "I've made many mistakes in my life. The worst of them was not fighting for you when I should have. Not telling you that. Despite everything that separates us, the age, the origins, the experiences, I had never felt for anyone what I feel for you. I had never met someone who made me want to be better, who showed me a different way of seeing the world, who taught me that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts or business shares." He took her hand with delicacy, like someone holding something infinitely precious and fragile. "I'm not asking you to abandon Boston, your music, your dreams. I would never ask that. If you decide your path is there, I'll understand. But I want you to know that if there's any possibility, however small, that we could build something together." His gaze traveled around the room, the house, implying a shared future. "I'm willing to wait as long as necessary, to adapt to what you need, to support you in every step you take." Willow felt her heart beating so hard she feared it might be heard above his words. The intensity of her feelings, contained for so long, threatened to overwhelm her completely. "I'm afraid," she confessed with an honesty that only he had been able to inspire in her. "Afraid that we're too different, that the distance is too great, that time will change us in ways we can't foresee." "I'm afraid too," he responded. "I've lived long enough to know that nothing is guaranteed, that love isn't always enough, that there are obstacles that seem insurmountable. But I've also learned that there is no greater regret than that of opportunities not taken, risks not assumed, words not said." With infinite tenderness, he raised a hand to caress her cheek, a gesture so simple but loaded with such meaning that Willow felt she was melting under his touch. "I love you, Willow," he finally said, the words coming from the deepest part of his being. "I've loved you since you opened your eyes on that road and looked at me without knowing who I was, without caring about anything other than the fact that I needed help. I've loved you every day since then, even when I thought that staying away was best for you." Willow closed her eyes, letting the words envelop her, the same words she had dreamed of hearing and had feared she never would. And in that moment, as if a floodgate had opened inside her, she knew exactly how her composition should end. Without saying anything, she placed her hands back on the keys and began to play from where she had left the piece. But this time, the music flowed with a new certainty, with a resolution that spoke of reconciliation, of acceptance, of a love that transcended differences and distances. The notes rose intertwined, creating a harmony that didn't deny the contrasts but celebrated them, transforming them into something new and beautiful. And when the last note faded in the air, Willow turned to Elliot, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you too," she said simply, "and I want to try. It won't be easy, it won't be perfect, but I want us to find the way together." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of promise, of future, of infinite possibilities. A kiss that sealed not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new chapter. The morning light filtered through the mansion's wide windows, bathing the room with a golden radiance that seemed to bless the new day. Willow, awake for a few minutes, observed Elliot's sleeping profile, memorizing each line, each angle, as if wanting to engrave his image in the deepest part of her being for the days of separation that would inevitably come. They had spent the night talking until the early hours, planning, dreaming, honestly facing the challenges their relationship would encounter. The age difference, professional obligations in different cities, the disparate worlds they came from. No obstacle had been left unaddressed, unanalyzed, unaccepted as part of the path they had decided to travel together. "I could get used to this," Elliot murmured, opening his eyes and immediately finding her gaze. "Waking up and the first thing I see is your face." Willow smiled, feeling a happiness that almost hurt in its intensity. "You know what's strangest?" she said, propping herself on an elbow to look at him better. "That it doesn't feel strange. Being here with you in this house that represents so much for both of us, it feels like exactly where I should be." He extended a hand to caress her cheek, a gesture that had already become intimate, familiar, like a private language between them. "And yet, today, you have to leave," he said, with a note of resignation that he couldn't completely hide. "Only temporarily," she reminded him. "The competition is in 3 days. Afterward we'll have to find a way to make this work." They got up and had breakfast on the terrace, enjoying the view of the valley waking to life. The town extended below them, with smoke from the first chimneys rising in the fresh morning air, the church bells calling to the first mass. The factory in the distance beginning another day of activity. "I'd like to show you something before you leave," Elliot said when they finished breakfast. "Something that could be part of the solution." He led her to what appeared to have been an old barn, now completely remodeled. Upon opening the doors, Willow held her breath. The space had been transformed into a professional music studio with acoustic treatment, state-of-the-art recording equipment, and even a small raised area that could serve as a stage for intimate performances. "I was thinking," Elliot explained, observing her reaction with a certain nervousness, "that it could be a place where you could rehearse, compose, even record when you're here. And also," he paused, as if gathering courage for his next proposal, "it could also be the nucleus of a music school for the Valley's children. Something you could direct if it interests you, combining it with your career in Boston." Willow toured the space, caressing the equipment, testing the acoustics with some sung notes that reverberated perfectly in the environment. "You did all this for me?" she asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gesture. "For us," he gently corrected, "to create a bridge between your dreams and mine, so that you never have to choose between your career and what we can build together." The proposal was perfect, almost too perfect, and Willow felt a pang of doubt. Wasn't she repeating the same pattern from the past? Wasn't Elliot, with his economic power and experience, trying to mold her life, even with the best intentions? "It's wonderful," she finally said, "but I need you to understand something. I don't want to be a project for you, Elliot. I don't want you to reorganize your life, your resources, everything, just to adapt to me. This," she made a gesture encompassing the studio, "is incredibly generous, but our relationship has to be based on something more balanced." Instead of looking hurt by her words, Elliot smiled with what seemed to be relief. "I was afraid you wouldn't mention it," he confessed. "That you would accept everything without questioning out of gratitude or love, and that's exactly what I don't want. I'm not looking for someone who depends on me or who owes me anything. I want a partner who challenges me, who tells me when I'm wrong, who has her own voice and her own conditions." He approached and took her hands in his. "This studio is a proposal, not a fait accompli. We can adapt it, change it, even abandon the idea completely if it doesn't fit with your vision. The important thing is that we find the balance together, that we build this bridge from both sides." His words dissipated the last vestiges of doubt in Willow's heart. This wasn't the Elliot she had initially known, the man accustomed to imposing his will and making unilateral decisions. This was a man transformed by love, by reflection, by the difficult process of reinventing himself. "I would love to direct that school," she said finally, "sharing music with the children of the valley, giving something back to this community that saw me grow. It would be a dream, but with one condition." "Anything," he responded, willing to do whatever it took. "That it be a joint project, not just yours or mine. That every decision, from the curriculum to the last administrative detail, we make together. And that it eventually becomes financially sustainable on its own, not permanently dependent on your resources." Elliot nodded, understanding the importance of what she was asking. It wasn't just a matter of pride or independence. It was establishing the foundations for a relationship where both would be truly equal, despite their different circumstances. "It seems perfect to me," he said, and sealed the agreement with a kiss that promised many more agreements, many more negotiations, many more compromises in the future they were choosing to share. That afternoon, as the taxi waited to take her to the bus station, Willow said goodbye to her family and friends, with the promise to return soon, not just for a visit, but perhaps to begin a new stage of her life. "Take care of my daughter," Abigail said to Elliot as the three said goodbye at the door of the bakery. "She's the most valuable thing we have." "I know," he responded with absolute sincerity. "And I promise I'll do everything in my power to deserve the gift that having her in my life is." The woman who had initially viewed the relationship with such misgivings now sketched a cautious but genuine smile. She had seen the change in the man, had witnessed how his actions had benefited the entire community, and, most importantly, had observed the way he looked at her daughter, with a respect and devotion that no mother could reject. The farewell between Elliot and Willow was intimate, despite occurring in public. A prolonged embrace, a contained but promise-laden kiss, whispered words that no one else could hear. "I'll be there," he promised, "for the competition, in the front row." "I'll save you a seat," she responded, her eyes bright with anticipation. "And afterward?" "Afterward, we'll start building that bridge." As the taxi drove away, Willow looked through the rear window, observing Elliot's figure remaining motionless in the square, following the vehicle with his eyes until it disappeared around a bend. She didn't feel the devastating sadness of her first departure almost a year ago. This time the separation was tinged with hope, with shared plans, with a future that, although uncertain in many aspects, had the solidity that only decisions made with heart and mind in full agreement can give. On the bus heading to Boston, while the Vermont landscape gradually gave way to the Massachusetts scenery, Willow worked on the final details of her composition. Now it had a name, Bridges, a title that held so much meaning for her, for them. And as the notes flowed from her mind to the staff, she felt she wasn't just creating a musical piece, but documenting a journey. The journey of two people who, despite coming from seemingly incompatible worlds, had found a way to build a bridge between them. A bridge made of honesty, of commitment, of true love. A bridge that, although it would require constant maintenance, was designed to last a lifetime. Symphony Hall in Boston gleamed under the nightlights. Inside, tension and expectation were palpable as the audience awaited the start of Berklee's prestigious annual Young Talents competition, an event that had launched the careers of some of the most renowned performers on the American musical scene. Backstage, Willow nervously adjusted the folds of her dress, a simple but elegant creation in midnight blue tones that enhanced her figure and complemented the renewed sparkle in her eyes. Her Berklee classmates, equally nervous, mentally reviewed their interpretations or performed breathing exercises to calm their nerves. "You're radiant," Professor Lancaster's voice, her mentor, pulled her from her thoughts. "And most importantly, you're ready." Willow smiled, grateful for the support. The last 3 days had been a whirlwind of intensive rehearsals, final adjustments to her composition, and mental preparation for this crucial moment. But despite the fatigue, she felt stronger, more centered, more complete than ever. "Thank you for trusting me," she responded, hugging the professor with a spontaneity that would have been unthinkable months ago. "For allowing me to present my own composition, for helping me find my authentic voice." "You did the work, Mercer," Professor Lancaster replied, though her usually severe eyes showed a gleam of pride. "I just guided you to discover what was already inside you." A competition assistant approached to inform her that she would be the next to perform. With a final handshake from her mentor and deep breaths to center her energy, Willow prepared for the moment that could define her professional future. Meanwhile, in the auditorium, Elliot occupied a seat in the front row, as he had promised. He had arrived in Boston that same morning, with just enough time to check into the hotel and change for the occasion. Elegant but discreet in a dark suit, he seemed oblivious to the curious glances of those who recognized him as the former president of Blackwood Group, whose resignation was still a topic of conversation in business circles. His eyes scanned the event program, stopping at Willow's name among the finalists. "Willow Mercer, Bridges, Original Composition," the entry read, and each letter of her name seemed to shine with its own light on the paper. When the lights dimmed and the presenter announced her name, Elliot felt his heart stop for an instant, and then she appeared on stage, advancing with a serene grace toward the grand piano that awaited in the center. Under the spotlights, Willow seemed transformed. She was no longer the shy young woman from Oakidge, nor even the promising student from Berklee. She was an artist in full possession of her talent, her voice, her story. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and before beginning, her eyes briefly scanned the auditorium until they found Elliot's. An exchange of glances, a silent message, and then her fingers rested on the keys. The first notes of Bridges filled the space, crystalline and evocative. The piece began with a simple melody that represented her life in Oakidge, notes that spoke of roots, of tradition, of innocence. Then, the introduction of a contrasting motif, more complex and sophisticated, symbolized Elliot's entrance into her life. Both themes, apparently incompatible, began to dialogue, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint, reflecting the complexity of their relationship. In the development, the music became turbulent, with dissonances that represented the conflict, the separation, the pain of perceived betrayal, and the anguish of distance. But gradually, those discordant elements began to resolve into a new harmony, richer and deeper for having traversed the conflict. And finally came the resolution, the musical bridge that connected all the previous elements in a perfect synthesis. It didn't deny the differences, didn't simplify the complexity, but integrated them into something new and beautiful, in a promise of shared future despite the challenges. When the last note faded in the air, there was a moment of absolute silence in the auditorium. That suspended instant in time where true art leaves the audience breathless, processing what they've just experienced. And then, like a wave breaking against the shore, the applause erupted. It was a spontaneous, genuine, emotional ovation. The audience rose to its feet, recognizing not only the technical excellence of the interpretation, but the emotional authenticity that had moved even the most skeptical. Among the attendees, Professor Lancaster struggled to contain her tears, and Julian, Willow's friend, applauded with overflowing enthusiasm. But for Willow, in that moment of triumph, there was only one gaze she sought among the crowd. Elliot's, who contemplated her with a mixture of pride, admiration, and a love so evident that it seemed to illuminate his face from within. Hours later, when the competition concluded and Willow was announced as the winner, receiving not only the first prize, but also a special mention for the originality and depth of her composition, celebrations followed, congratulations from colleagues and professors, promises of professional opportunities, interviews with music critics impressed by her talent. But the real celebration, the most significant, took place in the tranquility of a small terrace at the hotel where Elliot was staying. There, sharing a bottle of champagne, and with Boston's lights creating a perfect backdrop, they could finally be alone, processing together the magnitude of what had happened. "You were sublime," Elliot said, raising his glass in a toast. "For a moment, everyone in that room lived your story, our story, through your music." "Our story," she repeated, savoring the words as much as the champagne. "It's curious to think that it all began with an accident, with the sound of metal against metal on a lonely road. Sometimes the most chaotic beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinations," he reflected, intertwining his fingers with hers on the table. "And speaking of destinations, I wanted to ask you something." With a suddenly serious expression, Elliot extracted an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. Intrigued, Willow opened it to find legal documents inside. "They're the papers for the Willow Valley Cultural Foundation," he explained as she examined them. "An independent entity, with its own board and funding secured for the next 5 years. Its mission, to create and manage the music school we discussed, as well as other cultural projects to revitalize the region. And I want you to be its artistic director." Willow studied the documents with growing amazement. Everything was there, structured exactly as they had agreed. A joint project with guaranteed financial autonomy, designed to be sustainable in the long term. "You've thought of everything," she murmured, moved by the meticulousness with which he had materialized their shared vision. "I tried," he nodded. "But there's something more, something that isn't in those papers, because I wanted to ask you personally." He rose from his chair and, to Willow's surprise, knelt before her, not with the theatricality of a rehearsed gesture, but with the naturalness of someone following a heart's impulse. "Willow Mercer," he began, his voice slightly trembling but determined. "I know it's early, I know we still have a long way to go and many bridges to build. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, but a promise for the future. When you're ready, when we both feel it's the right moment, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" From his pocket he extracted a simple but exquisite ring, a white gold band with a small emerald that shone with the intensity of Vermont's spring fields. "It's not ostentatious," he continued amid her stunned silence, "because I know you don't like extravagances. The stone reminded me of the color of Oakidge's fields after the rain, when the sun begins to appear between the clouds. It reminded me of the hope you brought into my life. Willow contemplated the ring, then Elliot's face, where each line of experience, each mark of time, now seemed so familiar and dear to her. She didn't see the age difference, nor the social disparities, nor the contrasting worlds they came from. She only saw the man who had traveled a long road of transformation, the man who had risked everything for what he believed important, the man who loved her with an intensity that transcended any obstacle. "Yes," she answered with a simplicity that contained entire universes. "I don't need time to know. My answer is yes." When Elliot slipped the ring on her finger, both felt that it wasn't just a symbol of commitment between two people, but the culmination of a shared journey, of a melody they had composed together note by note, measure by measure, through the ups and downs and dissonances that now resolved into a perfect harmony. The kiss that sealed their promise tasted of future, of infinite possibilities, of a life where differences would not be obstacles but complements, where contrasts would not generate conflict but richness. A year later, on a golden summer afternoon, the Whitmore mansion hosted an intimate but vibrant celebration. In the garden, decorated with garlands of wildflowers and lights that seemed like stars fallen from the sky, close family and friends gathered to witness the union of two people who, against all odds, had found in each other their true home. The Willow Valley Music School was already a reality, with its first course successfully completed and expansion plans for the following year. Young talents from throughout the region had discovered their voice through Willow's passionate teaching, who divided her time between her professional commitments in Boston and her work in Oakidge. Elliot, for his part, had found a new purpose directing sustainable development programs in rural areas, applying his business experience to projects that prioritized social and community impact over immediate economic benefits. As Willow, radiant in a simple but elegant dress, walked arm in arm with her father toward the improvised altar under an arch of roses, her gaze crossed with Elliot's. In that silent exchange, there was an entire conversation, an entire story, an entire future to build. Around them, the beloved faces, Abigail, moved to tears, Hazel, proud with her own wedding ring shining on her hand, Mr. Fletcher, older but with the same kind smile, Professor Lancaster, who had traveled from Boston for the occasion, Julian, now a good friend of the couple, and even, in a gesture of reconciliation that had surprised everyone, Alexander, Elliot's son, who observed the ceremony with a mixture of curiosity and cautious acceptance. When they exchanged their vows, they were not grandiloquent promises or impossible oaths. They were sincere words, born of shared experience, of deep knowledge of each other's strengths and weaknesses, of love that had matured through trials and challenges. "I promise to build bridges, not walls," said Elliot, holding Willow's hands in his. "Bridges between our worlds, between our differences, between what we were and what we will be together." "I promise to compose our melody day by day," she responded, with that voice that now captivated audiences throughout the country. With its dissonances and harmonies, with its moments of intensity and calm, always seeking beauty in each shared note. And when the kiss sealed their union, while applause and cheers erupted around them, both felt they had reached the end of one chapter, only to begin another even more exciting one. A chapter they would write together day by day, year by year, overcoming obstacles, celebrating triumphs, growing together through the changing seasons of life. That night, as they danced under the stars in the garden of what was now their shared home, Elliot whispered in Willow's ear, "Do you know what I like most about our story?" "What?" she asked, carried by the music and happiness. "That it's perfectly imperfect, that it didn't follow any pre-established script, that it forced us both to change, to grow, to become better versions of ourselves." Willow smiled, recognizing the profound truth in his words. "Like the best music," she nodded. "The one that surprises, that challenges, that transforms both the performer and the listener." While the party continued around them, with laughter and conversations mixing in a joyful cacophony, they kept dancing, synchronized in body and soul, like two different instruments that had found the perfect way to complement each other. And so, in a town that had gone from being a forgotten point on the map to a model of rural revitalization, a man who had abandoned an empire for a dream, and a woman who had found her authentic voice after a long journey, began together the rest of their days. Not with the naive illusion that everything would be perfect, but with the shared wisdom that it was worth facing any challenge when done hand in hand with true love. Because in the end, as Willow had discovered through her music, and Elliot through his personal transformation, the differences that seem to separate us are often the very bridges that, well built, connect us in the most profound and meaningful ways. The echo of our hearts, Willow thought as she rested her head on her now-husband's shoulder, is no longer distant. Now it resonates in unison, creating a harmony that I couldn't even have imagined a year ago. And in that thought, in that perfect moment crystallized in time, was the very essence of their story. Two souls who, against all odds, had found in their differences not an insurmountable abyss, but the bridge to the deepest and truest love.